Here we are in question number 10. Accounts receivable usually appear in the financial statement position as what? Its current assets immediately. Accounts receivable by default is current assets, unless if that accounts receivable is resulted from what you call this one, non-trade transactions. Okay. In this case, the problem is silent, so therefore this is a current assets immediately presented immediately after the cash and cash equivalents. And by the way, there are some presentation over in the arrangement of the assets are from non-liquid or from non-current then to current. So that would appear as it depends upon the description of the entity. Letter A as either current assets depending whether the allowance method direct method, it's irrelevant. Okay, doesn't make sense. Well, it's not related to that. Only if the balance sheet method estimating uncollectible accounts is used. No, balance sheet method. No, these are for the estimation of the allowance of doubtful account expense or the allowance of expected credit loss. As current assets combined with cash, no, it is a separate. There is a separate line item. Actually, in fact, that is we call that one is that is under the trade and other receivables. Okay, that's their classification. But we're talking about here only current. Accounts receivable is one of those under the line item trade and other receivables. If the gross amount of the receivables includes unearned interest or finance charges, this should be includes unearned interest and finance charges. This could be what? This could be deducted in arriving the net amount to be presented in financial statements. Why? Unearned interest and finance charges are not part of they have uh they have to be deducted. Okay? As always, yung mga finance charges na yan. Okay? That's the answer for number 11. Number 12 is the most theoretically sound method of accounting for cash discounts or credit or on credit sales. Cash discounts, the most theoretically sound method is what? Is theoretically is a uh there's a saying that sales discount should be always taken immediately because it must be matched with the sales In other words, if the sales is recognized, so is the sales discount. If there is any to be expected to be granted, so it has to be deducted outrightly. So the net method is the theoretically sound, but the most popular in here, as we can see, is gross method. Okay, but again, theoretically is the net method. Okay, now in 13, a non-interest bearing note received in exchange for the property of goods and services is called what? Non-interest bearing note is recorded at what amount? At present value or market value. Okay, in exchange of goods. So there are priority. Number one, the non-consideration given. Okay, second, fair value of the note. And the third, there's no third actually. It's the face value. So in here, the answer is letter A. Fair market value of the services or the note, whichever is more reliably determinable. But in the hierarchy, actually, if you go back to the theory, this is the first, if this is given, it has to be followed. Okay. Okay. Next is 14. In here is a loss on sale of receivables. Okay, this is factoring. Sale. The keyword is sale. And to say this is a factoring way of receivable finance is recorded when the sale is what? Is without recourse or with recourse? With or without recourse? Is this true? We could go back to the what do you call this one, to the theory. Okay, here in the factoring, this is a sale of receivables without recourse. You can see in here that under the without recourse, the entry the entry in here is there's a loss immediately that is recognized. This loss is the amount deducted as a factoring fee. Okay? Okay. For if we're talking about the notes receivable in here, if receivable notes discounting with recourse and without recourse, in with recourse, in with recourse, the only entry at the initial in here is only that the seller is recognizing a liability on the discounted notes. However, doon sa without recourse, pagdating dito, ay wala siyang nire-record na liability. Instead, dito sa without recourse, instead, there is an outright recognition of the loss of the notes of receivable. So that's why my answer in here is for without recourse. There is a loss on the receivables because that is an outright sale. Okay, that's the explanation with that. Okay, now let's move to number 15. When an account previously written off, okay, is subsequently recovered and collected, the transaction would be. So that would be a question now if there is allowance method or profit method. I mean, direct write-off method. In direct write-off method, when there is a write-off, the AR is immediately on the credit side, while the bad debt expense is on the bad debt expense is on the debit side. In other words, this bad debt is immediately reported to the PL. When it's recovered, then it has to be reversed. Bad debt. Okay, there is a bad debt recovery, which is an income in here, then credit. Then a cash is received. Then that's it. Therefore, there's a bad debt recovery. So pag direct of method, there's an increase in profit when there is a recovery. Okay, so this is the correct one. When it comes to the allowance, bakit siya mali? Kasi ganito, no? Pag allowance, pag mayroon ka nagkaroon ng right of allowance for ECL and credit AR. Okay, ganun yung entry. Pag nagkaroon ng recovery, debit AR and reverse or reinstitute the allowance for ECL. So that's the how it is. Okay? And now, when at the time of collecting, then credit cash, same as the direct write-off, then just like that. Okay, so therefore in here, under the allowance method, you don't see any what? Any increase in profit. So therefore, letter A is the correct answer. Okay, let's continue to number 16. Club Intramuros ship the wrong shade paint. So they're expected of return. The customer agreed to keep the paint. However, there's no return because agreed to keep the paint. And upon being offered 10%, so there is an allowance reduction. So sales allowance. Okay. Allowances. Then the price reduction is example of sales allowances. Okay, of course. And on 18, yeah, on 17, theoretically, the amount of estimated future returns and allowances on credit sales should be recorded during the period. Okay, during the period of sale. So this is in the case, magkakaroon tayo ng issue pag ito dito 2026 at saka dito 2027. Halimbawa, dito nagkaroon ng sales while the allowance or the returns was happened here. Okay? Therefore, there is an issue with the mismatching. Kasi yung sales return kailangan dapat dito siya ma-report sa 2026. So that's the theory. Okay? So as not to overstate the sales in here and not and also the ending. In practice, these estimates are rarely recorded because there's too much uncertainty, yun nasabi, and uncertainty surrounding such estimates. Yeah, this is could be accepted. The amount of such returns and allowances is usually not material. Yes, this is also. And such estimates are not allowed according to accepted. No, this is not. The amount of such returns allowances tends to fluctuate too greatly from period to period. No, this is not. Okay, this is the right, because we are always considering the materiality, as we have to go back with the basic concepts of the framework. So there is a word keyword in here, in practice. So in practice, we consider always the materiality. Such amounts or returns and allowances are not material, then why do you have to be bothered in considering such theory that has to be matched in order to avoid overstating the sales and at the same time the accounts receivable? So the answer is letter B. Letter number 18. Which of the following methods may not be appropriate for estimating budgets? What do you think? May not be appropriate. So yung percentage of income, yun yung may not be appropriate. It's not anymore. Yung suitable talaga is yung aging, percentage of the accounts receivable. Ang aging is based on the accounts receivable. The percentage of outstanding is based also in the accounts receivable. At saka individual collective based on the outstanding receivables. So all of them, of the three, are based on the accounts receivable, and the percentage of income is based on sales. So that's why it's not anymore appropriate to estimate the budget based on this. 19, which generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, best supports the establishments of the account of allowance for doubtful accounts. What's that? It's the matching. Is that right? Okay. What do you think is the yeah, matching, because we need to match and we don't have to wait for the bad debt, actual the bad debt or write off. So therefore, before it is happening, we need to less the allowance for expected credit loss. So that's it. That's for the number 19. For 20, a receivable financing that is equivalent to an absolute sale of the accounts receivable is absolute sale is what we call factoring. Yeah, that is the only. This one is not, this one is not, this one is not. So therefore, only C is the correct answer. Because in factoring, this is a sale of AR without recourse. Okay, take note of that. Okay, yun lang yung ano na, basta factoring without recourse yan. 21, when note receivable is discounted with recourse. Okay, this is the key word. So what will happen pag with recourse? There is a liability on discounted receivable. Is credited equal to the face value? So this is the question. Because sinabing equal to the face value, it's not, right? Because it should be equal to what? That the expected liability, and the face value is not the expected liability. I mean the liability on the notes receivable financing. Notes receivable is credited to equal to the face value. No, it's not. The liability discounted is credited equal to the net to the proceeds. Yes, proceeds is the liability of the seller of the notes receivable. Notes receivable is credited equal to maturity? No. Kasi yung maturity value, tandaan mo, mag-start tayo sa maturity. Maturity value, okay, then dyan tayo magsisimula. Then, i-multiply natin yung, yung discount, right? Which is subject to the period of discounting. Okay? So, after that, we can have the net proceeds. The net proceeds will be the basis for the notes receivable discounted. Okay. Parang, if you try to go back to that area, so makikita mo dito, in computing the maturity value, we started at the principal